I just feel it's appropriate to go live with that GIF running for just a few moments. I have notes and stuff. I came to this prepared today because, hey, you know, if you're going to present a critique of the most famous and quite possibly best dungeon master running at the moment, then hey, might as well start by taking the piss, right? So I'm gonna do my best to be entirely fair, as technical as I can. I do not want any of these reviews to be, you know, I wouldn't do it, therefore it's bad, or, you know, it's not to my taste, or, you know, I like that he does this, I now do this, anything like that. I want to try and keep it as objective. It's hard to be objective about an art form because, you know, I've said it before 1,000 times, and I kind of want this GIF to just be running forever in the bottom corner. Do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to be a terrible human being for just a moment. Yes! I entertained myself. All credit goes to Joe Cat, who I would love to see DM one day so that I could maybe do another video based on his style. That would be nice. So, basics, obvious points out of the way first of all. First and foremost, everybody knows this one. Matt Mercer is a voice actor. He is, before he is anything else, a voice actor. The guy's talent is in his voiceover work. Yes, that means he can just drop in and out of accents on a whim, or, you know, funny voices. Everybody knows the funny voices. But people often neglect to consider the actor part of that. You know, it is a profession. It is one that he has trained to do. It is one that he has done professionally for many, many years. It's not as much about his ability to do the funny voices as it is his ability to step into a role. His ability to assume the personality of the NPC, the character, the person that he has written and he has designed. And he can make informed decisions on the fly about that person because he has assumed the role. Acting makes roleplay better because roleplay is acting, ultimately. Especially when you get into, you know, a lot of the improvisational steps that he takes. Because he has to. It's nature of the field. And a lot of actors do use tabletop RPGs for basically that exact reason, because it makes your ability to ad-lib vastly better just by being able to make things up within an organic situation. And again, you know, everybody knows and loves the funny voices. Everybody knows Victor the Powder Merchant. People know this character. People are familiar with sort of that mental image, that the Black Powder Merchant who's lost half his teeth and almost all of his fingers to explosions, because Matt Mercer can sell the funny voice. We also know Pumat Sol for very, very similar reasons. But certainly in Campaign 1, we also know some of the bigger characters. I'm trying to think of some of the names. And how I'm struggling to bring them to mind because I've got a terrible memory for names. But he embodies the personality, the decisions of a character when he assumes the role. Campaign 2, The Gentleman. He doesn't have a funny voice. He has mannerisms. He has his sort of suave and debonair style. He has this sort of lavish criminal attitude. Does he have a funny voice? No. But you know the character straight away. You take that voice a few steps in one direction, and he is Gilmore. From Campaign 1, Gilmore's Glorious Goods. He has that same sort of suave, sophisticated attitude, but there are subtle and important differences that you can only do Because Matt Mercer has years and years of experience as a voice actor. That's what he do. That is what he is good at. That is still hot. Anyway, it's a talent. It is a skill he has honed and refined and utilized in his hobbies. That is what he do. He's got the resources as well. Like, he has access to things like the Dwarven Forge scenery and all of the background sounds that he's legally allowed to broadcast. I'd love to be able to do that myself. Dude has the money to back it up. And even going back, he had the big paper maps and things because he had a bit of backing behind him to make the miniatures, to create things as well, and the things that you gather as a collection over a long period of time. Again, I'm not going to overly fuss about the resources he's got because they're not what makes him a good DM. He's got the experience, of course he does, because he's been at this for longer, certainly longer than I've been at it. And one of the major aspects of the Matt Mercer effect, people say, why aren't you Matt Mercer? A lot of DMs that Critical Role fans have played under maybe have half of Matt Mercer's experience if they're lucky, if they're old hats. The guy has played in very many different editions and different campaigns because he's got he lives in an area with a lot of players and a lot of players that are in his academic field, as it were. So he's had that level of availability. I don't think he's much older than me. Actually, that's an excellent point. I am shamelessly going to Google how old is Matt Mercer. How old is Matt Mercer? 38 years, so he's got a few years on me. But even then, he started DMing at a way earlier age as well, or he started playing at a way earlier age. So yeah, he has that experience way over and above what I have. And I consider myself these days to be old hat compared to 90% of players. The way the whole thing's been booming, I'm probably way off with that percentage, but besides the point. Yeah. Last sort of major obvious point. Perhaps his biggest advantage is the fact that he's played with the same people for most of that time. Campaign 1, you're jumping into an existing game, and that's kind of why I bounced off Campaign 1 to begin with, because you're jumping into an existing narrative. And you compare where Campaign 2 is compared to where Campaign 1 was at the start. That's how long they've been playing together for. So he knows the rhythms of his players. He knows the little sort of personality quirks. He knows their role-playing style. It's something I want to get into as well later on, because there's a lot of minutiae in each of their playing styles that Matt knows how to deal with because he's used to it. But me looking at it from the outside, I find myself thinking, if that was my player, that's not what I would do. Especially not if they were a new person. But, like I say, I'm going to try and keep that I wouldn't do that attitude out of this as far as I can. But yeah, recently Travis Willingham attempted to roleplay romance. Matt actually took the time to comment on how proud he was of Travis Willingham attempting to roleplay a romance scenario, even though he swore he'd never do it, apparently. He's also sort of made a pointed comeback about the fact that Taliesin Jaffe is just a master at witty comebacks and scathing retorts. And that's it's nice when, yes, a player, but also, a friend can sort of pull that out of you, can sort of point and say, that's a good thing that you do. I like when you do that. That's awesome. Or, Mercer as well is used to Sam Riegel being disruptive. He knows how to roll with the punches and then let them sort of flow back into the game effortlessly. Sam Riegel as a player, for so many DMs, would be way too much. But they've been playing together for years, so it's a lot easier. Same again, Liam O'Brien is possibly my favourite player in terms of, like, being a role player. But dude is such a rules lawyer. And again, that's another point I'll circle back to later on. I have plans for this, by the way. Like, on the other screen, I have plans and thoughts and things that I think. So yeah, that was all the obvious points. He's a voice actor, he has resources, he has experience, he has players that he has played with for a long time. I don't know exactly how long, but, you know, their experience together is self-evident, as it were. Those are the big... Those are certainly the obvious reasons why he is as celebrated as he is by the community, as it were. Which then kind of leaves me with the nitty-gritty, the actual, you know, from a DM's perspective, here's the good stuff, as it were. Again, coming back to the notes. Exandria. The world that he has created is something that he has built up over decades. He has released 2 books on the subject, and they are not thin volumes. So what it is, it's Explorer's Guide to Wildmount and the Tal'Dorei campaign setting. There's 2 separate continents. I kind of get the feeling that there may be other continents in his setting in Exandria. He hasn't done what I have done and, you know, taken one campaign setting and torn it up one day and made a new one the next day. He doesn't make a new world every single time he sits behind the screen. This is something that has been refined and shaped and sculpted. I believe, if I remember rightly, since he was in school, I remember him saying that he has been adding to and carefully building and sort of working on details. And it's changed over time. It has been sculpted and adjusted, and you can see, certainly if you read through the list of the gods present in his world and their history, their backstory, he's basically lifted the pantheon from 4th edition. Pretty much. Actor for actor. Torog is like a very 4th edition god. Like, I don't think he was even slightly as prominent in other editions. Certainly not now, certainly not in 3.5 as he was in 4th. And his presence as a significant player in Matt Mercer's history is evident that 4th edition had a significant impact. Excuse me. It's been through Pathfinder and the like, and it's been shaped by that. It's been through, as I say, various editions, and he's bringing in experiences from other games. But it is, again, self-evident. When you work on something and you refine something like that, and you're the one who's running it, that is going to be so good. It's going to come good, because anywhere your players go, any decisions that they make in terms of travel, in terms of direction, in terms of who they want to interact with, he's starting from a deep and rich foundation of knowledge. Straight off the bat. So, yeah, building on his acting skills, he knows how to step into the shoes of the common citizen in Whitestone, as a prime example, because he knows the cultural background that that person has grown up in. He knows what type of people you're likely to encounter on the streets, and he knows how those people are different from those of Imon, from those of the Menagerie Coast, and so on and so forth, ad infinitum. That is a potent thing to be able to bring to the table. That is not something that you can just snap out of midair. The characters that he's working with, that he has built and designed, and that he's improvising, don't emerge from a vacuum. They are not entirely improvised. They are the product of decades of careful, meticulous refining and processing and an intimate knowledge of a history of his own creation. In terms of publishing, it's... I mean, like I say, it's a term I picked up from Molly. I don't know where he got it. But it's what you'd call a heartbreaker, where if any part of the setting comes unraveled, you kind of upset the balance of the entire setting. It's not quite that bad. I would say it's worse for that than Eberron is, because Keith Baker leaves a lot of big questions open to interpretation. Matt Mercer has answers. He knows what is where and what has happened. And having read through the books, or at the very least sort of dipped heavily into them, he knows what the answers are to most of his questions. He leaves some stuff up to other people, but it's not a completely bound and tight parcel. It is very open to interpretation. No, it's not. It's the opposite of what I just said. It's very restrictive on interpretation. That's the word I was after. So yes, you do get to be a better DM when you are building up on a foundation of decades, and yes, that comes from experience, but it also does come from having spent so long putting in the work. Putting into context some of the stuff that I said the other week about parceling information as well. When he gets into the game itself, when he gets into describing an area, again, it's partially based on his knowledge of the world, but his use of descriptive language is, I would say, about as good as you'll find it from any dungeon master. And he can get away with it a lot because of the players that he's with. But he's given time to sort of monologue his way through descriptions of a region. Partially because his players know and trust him enough to know that he's not going to overload them with knowledge. He is just trying to sort of soak them in a feeling, as it were. Like when you enter a room, he'll feed you enough to let you feel like you've walked into that room. But the fine details, again, like I said a couple of weeks ago, he very carefully parcels it out. He makes sure that he doesn't overwhelm you with the tiny details that you need to pick up on, but he lets you discover them himself. I'm going to finish this because this is getting to the right temperature. And one of the things I picked up on that he's particularly fond of, in so many cases, he will describe the light conditions in a room, anywhere and everywhere he goes. Like, he will, maybe he won't exactly talk about the light, but he will make mentions of the light sources in a room, if such they are. And his use of mood and tone when describing an area, you pick up on the adjectives and things that he's using, and that does... It either changes the assumed lighting conditions or sort of informs you of a certain temperature within a room, like an emotive temperature, and that does affect your sort of knowledge of like the colours and things that are at play in any given space. It makes a difference. Lighting is one of those things that can alter a scene completely, and if you watch... Oh god, I've forgotten his name. Jacob Geller on YouTube. He recently did a video essay about how forests can appear. It's called 1,000 Ways to Describe a Forest. And he's talking about, how a forest can appear in infinite number of games. And the way he describes it really, pardon the pun, shines a light on how Matt Mercer's descriptions can change dramatically depending on the feel that he's trying to evoke out of two very similar scenes. I could not, for the life of me, give you an accurate description of any one particular scene off the top of my head, because there's so goddamn many, and I didn't prep hard for this. I mostly went sort of broad strokes. But, you know, you walk into two different pubs, and you immediately get two different feelings. Pubs, taverns, inns are one of the most important things, I would say, to get right in any D&D game, because they are a social hub. They are a nexus point for people, and that can set the tone for a city, that can set the tone for a time and a mood, and so on and so forth. And that's one of the metrics you can use to sort of pick out how places are different and how describing things differently can change the whole world. Pulling from the descriptive terms, combat. He's also very descriptive, and that's another thing that I certainly tried to do before I got into Critical Role. I can't remember. I think it might have been Chris Perkins I'd been listening to, and hearing how he would translate numbers into action, into motion, into changes. Those of you who don't know Chris Perkins, I'd say that he popularized the idea of the publicized game, because he started with a bunch of guys from Penny Arcade and I think Control-Alt-Delete. I'd have to go back and look it up. Listening to him, I started learning how to turn numbers into descriptive language. Matt Mercer is, again, one step better. There are times, and this is where I'll start openly critiquing, there are times when he goes into it a bit too much. His voice actor absolutely shows when he responds to every hit with a sort of classic Soldier 1 grunt. You know, he's 100% in the recording booth in those moments. But he'll sell you on the swing of a blade as easily as he will sort of going into the minutiae, the fine details of what a spell does. You can read it off the page, but he can turn it into a visual thing. I'm currently watching The Trial of the Take, the way early campaign 1, and listening to him describe the way disintegration works on a giant. That is a big, powerful spell with a terrifying effect. How do you describe a giant being hit with disintegration and not dying from it, and not, you know, not losing out the ability to swing an axe or anything like that? And he's maybe a little overly flowery in his language, but it does help make combats far more watchable and far more digestible and far more narrative intensive. Like, he will, as easily as describing a room that you've just walked into, he will keep an emotional intensity and a descriptive intensity throughout a combat. It does make combats longer, and that's always been a criticism of pretty much every tabletop RPG, barring a few that have made it a mission to shorten the length of combats. He is every bit as descriptive, and it shows in the emotional reactions of his players. Partially because they are yes-anding their way through combat, they are picking up what he is putting down, because they're professionals. That's what they do. But he is every bit selling it, and that would make any player as excited to be a part of that combat as it would do the people he's been playing with for years. He is... Let's draw back from my notes so that I don't get lost. He's a very giving DM. And again, that ties back into how long he's been playing with people, but watching him with new players, he gives them a lot of space to roleplay. And because most of the people that he games with are actors, they will seize upon those opportunities and they will interact with one another. 100% they will. They will run with it. One of his finest moments, I would say, as a DM, was sitting there quietly for a solid half an hour while Liam O'Brien basically seized control of the table as he described the Mordenkainen's magnificent mansion of his own design. And Matt is just smiling beatifically and just allowing Liam to discover the space and explore his character through the space of his creation. And they'd worked together on that backstage for quite some time. What a wonderful thing that is, to open up to your players opportunities for character growth and exploration to the point where you can just let them take control of the table from you and have absolute trust that they will play it out without stepping on your toes, without completely disrupting the campaign, without disrupting the enjoyment of the other players, without seizing the spotlight, which is one grumble I do have later on. Cons are down below. I'm working through the pros section at the moment. But he can trust his players with that stuff. And it is important, I think, for any DM, whether you're playing with somebody you've never played with before or somebody you've been playing with for years, to let them explore those opportunities to discover things. You saw it as well with Percy, Talison's character from last campaign. He would inquire about things he wanted to build because he was very heavy on the sort of tinkering side of things. And Matt would be very permissive. He would not sort of let him get away with proverbial and literal murder. But he would say, okay, that's something you could potentially build knowing what you know. And you're going to need this, that, and the other. And if he didn't think he knew, he at least gave him the role and warned him, this is going to be a high DC. It's achievable, but you're going to need to really roll well to have that idea. And he always gives that opportunity. It's a rare thing for Matt Mercer to say no, because his training over decades of voice acting and improv is to play by the rule of yes and. He can also do yes but. Yes but I think is probably more important than no. It's like, you can, but I'm going to need a good role from you for it. Or you can, but it's going to cost a hell of a lot. Or you can, but it needs more time than you have right now. It is within your capabilities, but it is not something immediately accomplishable. That is a big door to leave open for players, and something that he is very good at, whether it's with new players or with old players. DMs need to be able to show that kind of trust with players, and sometimes you don't have to actually trust the player to do it. You just have to be able to show them the trust. Same again with backstories as well. Like, easily one of his biggest assets is the ability to take character backstories and work them into a campaign. I will never, ever criticize him on that one, because, my God, that is a talent. And that is something that is very, very difficult to pull off for every single player at the table. Again, and I will harp back to this a lot, it is because he is an actor. It is because he is playing with people that he has known for years. It is because he knows that his players are intimately familiar with his world. He has a lot of assets at his disposal that allow him to be very good at that. Doesn't matter. Dude is good at it. He is so wonderful. And because his players are actors as well, they will, and we saw it a lot in campaign 2, sorry. His players are very good at leaving doors open for him and saying, hey, here's a gap, fill in this gap. Like, prime example, not got a heavy curse laid upon her way before the campaign started, and he let Matt decide how that would be resolved and who done it. Mollymock and Yasha both have vast yawning gaps in their memory. They have a recent history, so they're not your classic white-haired cat-eyed amnesiac, just waking up as a blank slate. They had a recent history, but they have a gap. Certainly in Yasha's case, a history before that as well. In the case of Mollymock, a very rich and well-developed character who didn't need a backstory before the giant gap. And they let Matt Mercer fill in those gaps. They offered him a blank slate and said, here's where we come in. You've got to meet up with these... Like, if you've ever drawn old kids game where you fold up a bit of paper and you have to draw the head of a character and just leave a couple of little lines where the next player needs to pick up, and they draw the body of the character and leave a couple of little lines, and then they've got, and so on and so forth. They've kind of done that with him, but with their backstory, with the writing side of things. And that is such a wonderful thing to explore. I've realised I've left pictures of Chris Perkins up when I'm talking about Matt Mercer. I'll come back to Chris Perkins another day. Do go watch some of his games, because he's a great DM as well. He played Spurt, a very short-lived kobold, in one of Critical Role's sessions last year sometime. Anyway. But yes, those are all the good things. Cons. Because it does no favours to anybody for me to sit here and just ladle praise upon the guy everybody knows is the most popular dungeon master in the world right now, and I've sort of alluded to some of them. Hydrate first. Some of the biggest problems, I think, are spawned of the fact that he has played for so long with the same people. He gets guests in, and yeah, he goes off and he plays in other people's games. We've seen that. He kind of lets the personalities of the players overtake at times. My biggest problem. While he's good at encouraging people and leaving opportunities open for people to fill with their own narrative, their own role-playing, in that he lets some of the bigger personalities kind of run roughshod over the others. Watch Talus and Jaffe. If you watch an episode of Critical Role, watch 2 or 3 of them, and watch Talus and Jaffe specifically. Because so many times, and it is heartbreaking to watch, you'll see him... And it's always one of 3 people. Sam Riegel, Marisha Ray, and Liam O'Brien. Great role players, but I am calling them out right now. They will talk over other players without any qualms whatsoever. They don't know that they're doing it. I can see it all the time. And Matt's not watching the table. He's watching the player engaged. And he won't at any time cut them off, turn to whoever's being quiet, like Taliesin. They do get so overexcited about a situation. And yeah, so they should. It's a great game. I would love to be at that table. Absolutely I would. But I would, in every opportunity, turn to the likes of Taliesin, and Travis can be quite guilty of backseating a lot, and Ashley as well, possibly because she's had to jump in and out so much because of her career. Those 3 are the biggest ones for taking a step back and just letting other people seize control of the limelight. And maybe it is because of the yes and improv training that they are excessively permissive. I would say that Laura is one of the most balanced, and especially with her recent character, Jester, she's quite possibly one of the best for going amongst the group and trying to lift them up as far as she possibly can. That is a powerful thing. That is a gift for a dungeon master, to have a player willing to go to each of the other players and give them a chance to shine. Major example. I ran a weekend of games at the at the National Wargaming and Role-Playing Society. I've got a t-shirt somewhere to remind me of the acronym. But it's an inter-university competition for various games, war games, role-playing games, and that sort of thing. I had the chance to be a DM for a weekend. And I was working with a group of 2 other DMs, and we had to pick a favourite player out of 3 different groups that we'd run for that weekend. So each of us had seen 2 of the 3 groups. We had to assess the one player who got the first place wasn't the one who stood out the most, wasn't the one with the biggest and most powerful personality. It was the one who was the most giving, and she went to the other players and she gave them opportunities to lift them up. I was genuinely heartbroken to not have the same group the following day. And the other DM who ran for that group on the Sunday, same as well. He snapped up on that one player and said, yeah, she was exactly the same with me. And that is, if you are a player listening to this, open doors for people. Give them opportunities, interact with other people's characters and, ask them questions, encourage them. One of Laura's biggest assets is she will go to them and ask for advice, or she will ask them how they're feeling. Yeah. Hashtag player goals. What a wonderful thing for a player to be able to do. Yeah, I wish that Matt Mercer would be the one to go to each of his players and encourage that out of them. He does. He will, certainly in shopping episodes, he will go round to each of his players and ensure that each of them is engaged in a task. He will ensure that he knows how each of them has spent the time, and he will give them the time to explore the space, as it were. I think it's actually one of the times when Taliesin actually gets the opportunity to shine, especially as Percival. He would come in with a list. I have a to-do list. As Caduceus Clay, he comes in with this sort of wonderful beatific attitude, and he wants to just ingest the world around him. And he opens up the floor again for Matt to sort of get into the descriptiveness. But he's sort of feeding back as well. They're sort of bouncing backwards one to the other. How they're exploring and how they're improving upon the space. And that is a wonderful thing. But so often, it's just half the table seizing control of the game, and the other half along for the ride, there to support during combat situations or moments where certain skills are required. And that's campaign 1 and 2. It's a shame. And, it's not an unfair critique, I don't think. I trust that Mercer knows his players. And I trust that he does give them opportunities. But I also can't help but observe the whole table, and of everybody, it's Taliesin Jaffe who is being interrupted and is just putting himself into silence. Maybe that's been a recurring theme throughout their entire campaign. I don't know. Yeah. I just wish, Matt would be the one to sort of go to them and bring it out of them, or at the very least, to quiet down the ones who are dominating the table. Yeah, it's heartbreaking to see, and it's like I say, I'm saying it because it's not fair to any DM to put Critical Role on a pedestal and say this is exactly how D&D should be. It's not. It's how D&D is for them, and it's brilliantly entertaining. I've said it before, I will say it again. Critical Role is to role-playing games what porn is to sex. Talked about how wonderfully descriptive Matt is in combat. Combat is so slow and so boring when I'm watching Critical Role, and I have to say it has been getting worse. But it sort of goes through phases. Like some days it'll be brilliant, some days it really won't. It's the days when Matt is going to people and saying, "You've got to tell me what you're doing, or you're going to lose your turn." Because the biggest pro thing I can say for him is how much space he gives his players. And yeah, that opens up so many wonderful opportunities. Brilliant moments. Some of the best moments have been times when he has just stepped back and let his players be the ones to describe and be the ones to talk. But that also leads to the hours of planning and umming and ahhing and second guessing. And he'll say, "What are you doing?" If I reach that point where I've said it for the third time in a group, I've already failed, so far as I'm concerned. If I have to ask, "What are you doing?" a second time, and I get more umming and ahhing and thising and thatting and second guessing, I'm going to turn to the players and say, "Right, these are the plans I've heard. You either need to pick one, or I will say, make this roll, make that roll, make another roll, whatever is pertinent at the time," and say, "Right, you know this historically, or you know this based on who you're fighting, or you know this based on the terrain," that is going to eliminate some options and narrow it down to make those planning moments go from 40 minutes of talking and getting nowhere down to 5 minutes. And he'll let them do that in game. Yes, he'll rush them. Yes, he'll encourage them. Yeah, exactly. There is nothing wrong with cutting down your players' options. We play D&D and the myriad games like it because we want the option to do anything we like. But analysis paralysis, decision paralysis are crippling things, and it's what makes video games so much more fast-paced, is that you have limited choices and you have to pick one of them in a rush. The pressure is always on, and the world is responding in real time. Matt can let a 6-second turn draw out for 10 minutes. And very, very little of that is that wonderful, vivid, visceral description that I, half an hour ago, was praising him on. Yeah, he pads out the runtime of combat with these sort of brilliant, emotive characters, and, he's telling the story of these combatants as they're in a fight. And you'll watch combats turn on a dime because the way he plays out a character will make players go, let's change tack. Let's try this another way. And that's wonderful. That is beautiful. But by the same token, he's also giving players 10-15 minutes to, this spell, that spell. That kind of player bothers the hell out of me. And we've all got one. Like, I don't know how many DMs we've got in chat at the moment. I can see at least 2. But we've all got that one player who will take forever on their turn. I agree, in combat talking is a free out action, but not half an hour of conversation. I've seen that meme a few years ago. You can always say screw those options, I have my own idea. Exactly, yeah. There is nothing wrong with, give your players free reign. but maybe lay it out as an A or B, or you can do something else. Say, or you can do something else, but players will look at the A and B decision and be so much faster with their decision-making process. I do that all the time. Do my players feel like they are restricted? I do not think I have ever had a player come to me and say, I don't want it to be a black and white choice, can you just let me roleplay my character? More often than not, it's new players that I do it to. And in the end, they look at me with relief. There's a reason why all the A and B decisions might give them an idea. Exactly, yeah. A lot of times, I've presented players with A and B, and they've given me B+. And that is a wonderful thing, to watch a player, you'll say, well, you could do this, or here's this option. And they'll go, or, meaty, wonderful, brilliant moments. There's a reason why Choose Your Own Adventure books are so popular. Yes, they do restrict you to A or B, with a little bit of dice rolling at times, but that's not a bad thing. I will do A with a little bit of B. I will do B, but I will put a spin on it. I will do C, but I wouldn't have thought of that if you hadn't have said A to me. Those are wonderful things. And I don't ever see Matt Mercer say, you have this option, you have this option, or you have whatever else. It's always, what are you going to do? Which is a great question to begin with, but after the second time, it's just the DM sitting there being impatient, and it's not pleasant. It's not pleasant for me to watch as an experienced DM. I can't imagine it's great for people watching. I imagine a lot of people have turned off from Critical Role without knowing why, and it's because in those moments they're kind of a bit bored. God knows, I'm sick of hearing it. One last con I will say on the Matt Mercer side of things, tying back into sort of those planning moments. And this is something I will come back to when I review Matt Colville, because, like I say, if people are interested in me doing more of these, I will. Matt Colville will make a rules call in the moment and move on, and we'll look it up later on. Matt Mercer will spend 20 minutes looking up the rule. I've watched hundreds of hours of Critical Role for a very good reason. I have bought none of the Critical Role books. Both of them were Christmas presents. But, I wanted them as Christmas presents, and I have spent and invested time reading them because Matt Mercer is a good DM, because Matt Mercer has a rich and well-developed world, because he has insights into the game that I would not have thought of, and I have picked up so many skills by watching Critical Role that have made me a better DM. Yeah, it makes him better and more interesting, and it makes me better and more interesting by watching what he does and mimicking it where it's positive. But I say again, it does us no favours to give him carte blanche and say he is the perfect dungeon master, nobody is a better dungeon master than him. There are days when I would love to be Matt Mercer. I would love, some days stood at the top of the table. I would love to be able to think of a character name off the top of my head. I would love to have, one of my biggest flaws, I recognise this 100%, is inconsistency on the little details, like pricing of stuff. And it's because I will make a call on what the price of something is in the moment, based on my knowledge, and if you ask me the next time what the price was, I'll probably make a different call. But there's nothing wrong with that. There is, there's a lot more to be said for being consistent with how much you do. But there's nothing wrong with it if it keeps the game moving, frankly. Exactly, yeah. And I think, especially because he's professional, it is a positive thing to analyze and to critique, but this is where I come off as really pretentious. It elevates the art style to look at and critique the best. And Matt Mercer, I would say, is the best out there. He is far from perfect, but I have watched a lot of DMs who are professional or in a performative space have DM'd, and I have been DM'd for by a lot of people, or I have watched other people play, that I have picked up on habits and skills and things that I think afford me a certain license to point and say, well, you're doing that wrong. Or to say that you're doing something right. People have asked me to say to them afterwards, what did you enjoy? What did you not enjoy? And I will turn around to them and say, this was great. This was not great. But I know full well that with practice, in many cases, most people can do better, because it's a lot of new players, new DMs, who are asking me to say afterwards what was good, what was bad. Matt Mercer does not have the excuse of being new. Matt Mercer has a lot of experience. I prefaced the whole thing with saying dude has a lot of experience. I was going to say, I really, really hope Matt Mercer doesn't watch this. To an extent, I kind of hope he does, because I think we have been entirely accurate and fair. Are there any DMing rules Matt is consistently breaking to make D&D a great experience? Yes, many. More accurately, he breaks a lot of D&D rules. Much of it is fluff. Things like he will break open restrictions on character descriptions to let players explore what they can accomplish more. Like, case in point, tieflings can be neither blue nor purple. They can be human colours, or they can be varying shades of red or black. They can't be blue or purple. Doesn't matter. He made blue and purple tieflings. And there's just reason for that as well. Like, not all devils are red, frankly. Some of them rule over hell's layers that are made entirely of ice. You'll notice that whenever Jester uses Infernal Rebuke as a tiefling, it's shards of ice instead of a blaze of fire. That is because that is where her heritage stems from. It runs way back to the lines of, I think it's Levistus who rules over Cania, one of the frozen hells. It's besides the point. It is the short version. And, as well, because he is an actor, he will let players essentially DM the game for a while. He will let them just explore the space. Yeah, exactly. It also says the Dragonborn do not have tails. He made a culture in which the difference between tailed and non-tailed Dragonborn was hugely significant. That's very cool. That is exceptionally cool. I can't say that there are any DMing rules that he breaks. For DMs, it's a lot of unwritten rules and stuff, but most of the rules he's breaking is because he's homebrewing or modifying or changing and switching things up, and it just makes his world much more his own, as it were. I wouldn't say that he's broken any of the sort of DMing rules, like etiquette rules or anything like that. There are other people who may disagree with me, but you'll find a lot of the people who do are the old guard. But by the same token, I would also like the people playing now to understand what was then. And that is one thing that Matt Mercer has in spades, is respect for the origins of the game. And he breaks its rules. He has joyfully embraced the new style of the game, and he has put a stamp so big on it. I do think that Exandria will be taking the place of Forgotten Realms as the dominant roleplay setting, and it is because Critical Role has brought so many people into the game. Do I think Forgotten Realms should be forgotten? No. I've never played in Faerun. It doesn't interest me. And I'll be honest, for the same reasons that Exandria, I probably wouldn't want to play in either. It's pretty much cookie-cutter D&D. Eberron brings a spin to it that is entirely unique, whereas all Exandria does is lends a bit of a modern spin here and there. Eberron, Dark Sun, these are the settings that I enjoy because they are D&D classic with dozens of extra flavors chucked in and a overriding theme that says, this is not standard Dungeons and Dragons. We are running a parallel rail. We are going to play our own game, but also still roll d20 and have a fighter and a wizard and spell slots. And also, can I be a robot, please? I like Eberron a lot. But I think it's a good thing if Exandria becomes the new standard setting for the game. I genuinely do think that should be the case. Because it will... people will step into that who have gotten into the game since 5th edition, and people will step from one into the other, and they will know and they will understand. People going through 5th edition now are probably saying, what is Faerun? What is Forgotten Realms? What do these things mean? And they'll learn, and they'll discover, and they will uncover. And that is important. And I love that Eberron has published books now in 5th edition. What is the difference? Negligible beyond that which I've already said. Like, there's the little hints of modernity here and there, like sort of opening up a few more options. Mercer has rephrased the D&D basic gods. That which he calls the Platinum Dragon, most people know as Bahamut. The Wild Mother is not Mythala. I have forgotten. Torog is the Crawling King. He's basically taken all of the nicknames of the gods, and those are now what everybody knows them by. They don't know the actual names of the gods. They know them by their nicknames. And it's because there is a separation between the gods and the world, a strong separation. That is D&D Classic. But in D&D Classic, as it were, certainly 4th edition, people still knew the names of the gods, but, they were still held distant. And, he's got a lot of his own homebrew content. He's got his own continents and his own nations and his own chunks of history. Drow come from a location. Drow have a nation where they work together with other groups. That's not something that's in D&D Standard, but it's something that could very easily be in D&D Standard. And there are aspects that he's woven in, things like those of you watching Campaign 2, Uk'otoa, the Eyes of Nine, a lot of his sort of more eldritch horrors and things, and more sort of distant and esoteric stuff. That's all stuff that he has brought in himself. But he's kept basically everything from D&D Standard. It's fine, but then you step into Eberron and things get very different. The gods are very different. The history is very different. The creation myth is very different. Races have very dramatically different roles. Like elves in Eberron, they can be ancestor-worshipping necromancers. They can be Mongolian-style horse warriors. The Drow are Aztec-style feral jungle dwellers instead of Underdark dwellers. It's a fascinating discrepancy. Elves in Dark Sun, Athas, there's no trees for them to hug. They are people who run the desert. They just run across the desert wherever they go. They think it is beneath them to ride on animals, so they run everywhere. And they are these sort of wild and feral things with like great spikes of hair and weapons made of bone and obsidian. Oh, they're brilliant. And again, it's different. Halflings in Dark Sun aren't these quaint little hole-dwelling, fish-eating, eat forever and never grow fat homebodies. They are green place-dwelling cannibals, and they are effectively monsters. They are treated as monsters. In Dark Sun. In Eberron, again, they are sort of roughly divided into the city dwellers, who are sort of, give me a moment, they are sort of beatific, sort of, that they run the hospitals, they run a lot of the hotels, the hospitality industry. But then you go over to their homelands, the Talenta Plains, and they are dinosaur riding barbarian lunatics who sharpen their teeth and eat strangers. It's brilliant. So yeah, to answer the question that started me off on a rant about D&D campaign settings, does Matt Mercer break any of the rules as a DM? Not really, but also kind of yes, and it's mostly in the name of personalizing and making his world his own, and like something that is important and very personal to him. And it's a wonderful thing that he does. It is an incredibly creative space that he has gotten. He knows its details so intimately that he can't run a bad game in it. That is his world. That is his setting. He is in that world at his most comfortable. And when you can reach that point with a campaign setting, you can't go wrong. You just can't. If you spend decades refining your knowledge of a setting or writing a setting, then you're just gonna be good at it. Oh yeah, I left that gif up there as well, didn't I? Screw it, that's there for the duration now. Everybody knows what my logo is, I'm just going to leave that thing up. Sigil, not sigil. If I have one critique about Matt Mercer, and I will edit this into the video at the end, it is not sigil. It is not sigil! It's sigil! I swear to God, I will cry in your face, and I will make a scene if I ever meet you in person, Matt Mercer. Ah! Why do you hate me? Now I hope he never sees this.